All right, what's up, guys? Welcome back to another FTL Faster Than Light tier list. This is the every system and subsystem tier list that I've compiled. It was made by me. Follow me on Twitter if you'd like. We're going to be ranking them from S to D tier. Quick note, obviously things like the backup battery and the teleporter are optional, right? So it's easier to rank, should you buy them, should you not? Whereas things like engines and weapons technically are mandatory, and every ship pretty much has them, so you can't really, say don't buy engines, right? That doesn't make any sense. But instead, it's more like, is it worth upgrading? Is it worth investing in? And like, if it goes down, how much trouble are you in, etc. So we're going to be ranking all of them here. If you guys are enjoying the FTL content and the channel in general, please make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. It means a ton to me, a ton to the channel. I'm trying to grow it, trying to get as much content out here as I can. So make sure you do all that. And if you want to talk about FTL more, you like the game, you like chatting, you can talk to me and our other subscribers on the channel here. We have a FTL Discord. Link will be in the description. I encourage you guys to join. It's a ton of fun. But yeah, let's just jump right into this here. So the website, put them in a completely random order. So we're just going to go through it like this. I do have the wiki up if we need anything, but obviously I know what all the systems do. So let's just start off with engines here. So engines are really, really good. When I first started playing FTL, I did not value them that much. I was like, you need them to dodge, but whatever. Shields. If you have shields, you don't need engines, right? Because you just get hit in the shields, right? Turns out it's the other way around. If you have engines, you don't need shields. Now, obviously, I'm being slightly facetious, but realistically, if you have a high dodge chance because you have really good engines, nobody needs a shield, bro. You're dodging everything. So engines are one of the biggest keys to victory in FTL, and a lot of people, especially if they're new to the game, sleep on them. If you get to level 5 engines, which is the soft cap, you will be doing great work. A base 25% chance to dodge, combined with your pilot, which again, you pretty much guaranteed have to have a pilot, and your engine man, especially by the flagship, is probably maxed out in terms of skills. Engines are huge. You will, if you get to that 45% sweet spot, you're going to be dodging so many attacks, preventing so much damage, and really coming out with the victory way more often if you kind of get these engine upgrades. I would definitely get to level 2 or 3 as soon as possible. I prioritize shields a little more early on, but we'll get to that. But engines are absolutely an S tier system. They're essential. You need them to win, and a lot of people undervalue them for sure. So I think engines are definitely an S tier system. Yeah. Okay, backup battery is a subsystem, which, by the way, I just now noticed subsystems are octagons and regular ones are circles. So, fun fact. Now, backup battery being the only optional subsystem is kind of interesting because in one sense, it doesn't cost reactor power to use, which is good, definitely, and is, in a sense, free in that regard, other than the initial investment. So it can be useful. However, it's not crazy useful. It depends on your build. If you have other things like cloaking, hacking, mind control, right, you can power up your backup battery, put the power into these systems, and then as their timer runs out, the backup battery will die, and then you'll have kind of a nice cooldown for both of them. So your main reactor power doesn't have to get invested into these other systems, which is helpful, definitely. But I do find that generally you have enough reactor power if you play well to not really make it completely necessary. So I don't think the backup battery is bad. I don't know if any of these systems are bad per se, right? We'll go as we go. I might specify the tiers a bit more. We'll see. But I think backup battery, it has its uses. It's not completely useless. It doesn't have any negative effects, obviously. But I don't think it moves the needle enough in most situations to really help you win. If you go into the flagship with or without a backup battery, your chances don't change that much. Min-maxing wise, they're good, but I don't think it's the best system in the game by a long shot. So I'm going to put it in C tier, which is not bad. All right, we'll rename these. I always like doing this. So this is excellent system. A tier is going to be very useful. Or instead of excellent, we'll do mandatory. You can't win the game without this, or if you have it, it's going to make winning the game essentially a breeze in some respects. So very useful. And then B tier will be generally useful. It'll help you win the run, but not in, if you don't have it, you're not dead in the water. C is nice bonus tier, you know. Having a backup battery is good. You do have to get the initial investment, but if you do have one, it's going to be a nice bonus. And D is like situational because, yeah, situational. No system is really bad, but there are some systems that aren't quite as, you know, useful. So moving on, we got artillery. I don't have flak artillery and laser artillery separated yet, or at all, because they function in a similar way. They do work a little different, but the idea behind them is you have this like cannon that can fire at, you know, X intervals depending on how much you upgrade it, and the laser one at least goes through all layers of shields, which is quite nice. The flak one is also pretty good. I think it's probably not quite as good. It fires 7 projectiles, which is not amazing, despite the fact that it's, you know, like a massive flak gun. It's really not as good as you might think. So if you upgrade the artillery beams to the max, which costs quite a bit of scrap, it's only got a 20-second cooldown, which is good, but at the same time, it's not that good, right? Because most other weapons charge less than 20 seconds, and if you have a combination of burst lasers, flaks, pike beam, something like that, you know, 20 seconds is not that good, like small of a cooldown time. So even maxed out, these things aren't crazy, and of course, they're only on the Federation cruisers. Sometimes you can build a runaround where you have a super defensive Fed cruiser with a bunch of shields, bunch of engines, things like that, and try to use our artillery beam to do the bulkier damage, but there's a couple big problems with that. One, like I said, the cooldown isn't even that crazy. You know, if you could upgrade it to like be 10 seconds, that would be broken, and then you could actually do a pretty heavy artillery beam run. But 20 seconds is still like, it's mediocre. Plus, you can't aim where this goes, so it might hit a bunch of rooms. It might not. It might hit irrelevant rooms that you don't really care about. You know, it's really not that consistent of a weapon. And in FTL, you need consistency quite a bit. So I think the artillery beam is honestly not that good. The way I use it when I have ships with the artillery beam is I just try to keep 1 power in it, maybe 2, depending on my build, and just let it do some nice supplemental damage when I can. You know, it'll come in, it'll rake across the ship, usually after I've fired a couple volleys, and just do some good damage. I don't ever rely on it to win. You can do that if you'd like, but it's not really the way I play. So honestly, I think I'm going to put this in nice bonus as well. It's okay. You know, it can be useful for sure. But it's on such a small subset of ships, and it doesn't really help you that much. It's more just kind of a supplemental thing. Nice thing to have, you know. I don't think relying on it for builds is ever really that useful. But, all right, moving on to cloaking. Nobody's going to be surprised. This is an S tier system. Especially in base FTL, if you find cloaking, you have to buy it. This is going to make everything so much easier for you. Being able to get a free 60% dodge, depending on how much lower your cooldown is amazing. You're going to have like a base 20% dodge most of the time, independent of engine levels, something like that. So that's already a ton of chance to dodge like all shots. And if you get your engines up to level 4 or 5, you're over 100%, and you cannot be hit at all while cloaking. If you do some good timing with this, you can dodge like all of the flagship's missiles and their volleys. You get stealth weapons as well. This thing becomes even better. Cloaking is by far the best system that you can buy, you know, from a store or something. It's so powerful and keeps you so defensively, like, on the mark. You're not going to take nearly as much damage, because a lot of ships tend to have, aside from the flagship, if they have missiles at all, they'll have like 1 missile launcher, and that's really the only threat to your hull. So you can just hit cloak for that 1 battle, get your quick volley off. You know, FTL is all about who gets the first volley, who hits the most important systems and takes down the most. So if you can quickly take down their systems, and at the same time dodge their 1 volley in return, usually with a missile or something, you're golden. No damage taken. They're crippled then after that, and you can finish them off, and you didn't even take any damage because you had cloaking. So this is an S tier system. Always try to buy this. If you're still struggling to win an FTL, cloaking is the way to go, man. It's such a good defensive item and really pushes you over the edge in most runs. Okay, next up we got Clone Bay. So, just going to say it outright, I prefer the Med Bay to the Clone Bay in 99% of circumstances. The main reasons is I like to have my crew healed up to full, because if I get boarded, then I can fight back better. If I'm doing a boarding run, I think a Med Bay is better. Yes, if you lose your crew while boarding, congratulations, you have a Clone Bay, you can bring them back. Here's an alternative strategy. Don't be bad and don't lose your crew. Now, I'm being slightly facetious, but the reality is that A clone bay just hinders your boarding unless you're going for some weird suicide strat or you're not doing boarding correctly and you're losing your crew. You should never have to really lose your crew and rely on your clone bay to actually save you. So I don't think it's that good. I hate that it only heals you for such a small fraction every jump. It's like, I don't know, it's just annoying. You get someone down to like a fraction of a health. Your choices are either wait like 6 jumps or something, 7 jumps to get them back to max, or vent them, kill them, and have them respawn, which I absolutely hate because I hate losing skills. Even though it's not that much of a skill loss, I still like, it's just annoying. So the clone bays aren't bad, but I vastly prefer the med bay. So I'm going to put it in situational. This is more of a personal preference. If you like the clone bay a lot, then more power to you. I find that most builds do better with the med bay. It just helps keep everyone at max health every jump. You can pop people in. It's way easier for boarding. You can vent all of the rooms except the med bay, pop all of your crewmates into the med bay, and then you'll fight the boarders in the med bay, obviously, and be healing at the same time. No problem there. You get free combat skill, no threat. You don't have to worry about dying. This, you can't do that. You just kind of have to hope. And if your crew's almost dead, then you got to switch them out. So I'm not a big fan of the clone bay, man. I would never buy a med bay instead of a clone bay. It's just kind of a waste of money. Like, I'll put up with it. But generally, I think you should always go for the med bay if you have the opportunity to choose. Okay, so teleporting, the teleporter here, I think is generally useful. I'm going to put it in the mid tier, and here's why. So if you start on a ship that has a teleport already on it, you know, Mantis B, something like that, which is super powerful, Crystal B, whatever, you can make a lot of good use of this and get a ton of scrap. However, if you don't start with one, I tend to find in my hours of playtime, buying the teleporter isn't always that good of a choice because it's kind of difficult to actually beat the flagship with just boarding. You still need weapons to blow them up. It's, you know, if you kill all the crew on the flagship, you don't win, obviously. You have to kill them eventually. So boarding is really helpful for the flagship, but you can't really win with boarding. And so therefore, if you start with it, it's good to use, but I find even ships that are like board heavy, you know, Mantis B, Crystal B, whatever, by the time I get to the flagship, I might, you know, send them over, my crew over to break their weapons. But usually I'm fully converted to a gunship or at least have gunship capabilities to go alongside that. So yeah, I don't know. I find it good depending on if you start with it or not. Actually going out of your way to buy it unless you... Oh god, hopefully you guys can't hear that. They're like emptying the dumpster in my apartment. Jesus, that's loud. Anyways, yeah, so I don't really find buying it to ever be that much, you know, of a help. Maybe depending if you have a ton of money or you're playing on easy, then sure. But I think if you're going to buy a system, buy cloaking or hacking, which we'll get to shortly. I don't think buying teleporting is that useful. So that's why I'm going to put it in the mid tier here. Obviously, early on, it can be super powerful if you start with it. Okay, doors. So honestly, I think doors are a subsystem, and every ship has doors, right? So you can't like not have it, similar to engines. But I think of the subsystems, doors is one of the most important. So I'm going to put it in very useful. A couple reasons. If you get boarded, which you tend to, you know, throughout your run, having even just one layer of upgraded doors or manning the doors, whatever, you know, is best in your situation, makes you it way easier for your ship to survive. If you have to move your crew around and like fight them, it can take a lot of both mentally and like literally moving your crew around from the actual fight. And, you know, if you have to move your pilot to fight because you don't have doors that are blast doors yet, that can let you take a lot of damage because you're getting blown up now. Your pilot's not there. And being able to use airlocks efficiently with upgraded doors, I think is very, very useful. I tend to not fight boarders very often unless I have a huge surplus of crew because I prefer to keep my systems manned for those little bonuses and weapons, engines, piloting, whatever. So I think having doors to at least, at the very least, slow down enemies and prevent them from getting, you know, too deep. Usually I'll suffocate them. They'll probably end up breaking into my engine room, but they're at a quarter health, and then I can just finish them off with my crew, get some combat skill, and not have to worry about it. So I find doors to actually be very useful, especially as far as subsystems go. Okay, drones. So drones, this is going to be a hot one. A lot of people like drones. However, I'm going to be real. I don't think drones are that amazing. They're a nice bonus. Here's why. So weapons versus drones. Weapons beat drones every single time. Not a chance. You cannot win an FTL run. I mean, you probably could, right, if you're doing like a challenge run. But realistically, using like only drones or something is just not possible. You just can't win with just drones. They're a nice bonus, especially if you get a defense 1. That could be really good to tack on. It's pretty much just missiles are nullified for a drone part. But they have very little offensive power other than as a supplement. If you are, you have some ions and stuff, you can turn on your drone once their shields get taken down a bit and just do some good damage, especially with maybe a beam 1 drone. That can do a lot of damage to a shieldless opponent, right? But you need to get their shields down, and drones like almost literally can't get down high layers of shields. Like you need, they only shoot 1 projectile, right? So you have 3 combat 1 drones theoretically. That's 3 layers of shields, and they're not timed properly because drones aren't random, RNG based. So drones never really, they're difficult to make super duper effective for your runs. I think if you, the caveat is if you have a lot of money and you see like a defense drone 1, or you already have a defense drone 1 from loot, you got lucky, found it out in the sector, it could be good to have and pop that out when you see a ship with a missile launcher. It saves you a bunch of damage over time, and especially against the flagship, it can be nice as well. But again, it doesn't compare. If you see cloaking and drone control, yes, cloaking's a little more expensive, but you should always buy cloaking over drone control. Drone control is never going to be the make or break for your run. It is always a nice bonus for sure, and if you start with drone control, like on NGA, you can get some more weapons to actually have an effective gunship and keep those drones around for some other utility, right? Boarding drones, anti-personnel drones, not really that helpful unless in very specific circumstances. A system repair drone is kind of useful if you have drone control already. Getting one of those is very cheap. You might find one pretty easily, and you can just have them powered up for 1 drone part forever until it gets blown up. So it's generally a good utility system to have, but I never really go out of my way to buy it. If you're going for victories, just go for the stuff up here. If you're going for fun and you really like using drones, then no shame in that, right? They have their use, but I wouldn't consider them to be a top tier system, especially when you consider every time you use one, you have to use a drone part, which is a finite resource. Not as bad as missiles, but still, it is finite, right? And if you're using these finite drone parts, instead, you could be using them for hacking, which I think is, I'm going to put it in A tier. It's not quite S tier for me, but hacking is definitely the second best in base FTL, optional secondary system like this. It is so good and can get you out of a pinch really easily. So what I usually use for hacking, my ideal run, right, is cloaking and hacking as my 2 extra systems, right? If you hack the enemy shields, especially like the flagship, you can tank their shield levels. And if they have no shields, your weapons can go in, and it's just, you can do a ton of damage with this. Not only is it good for shields in 99% of circumstances, you can also hack their weapons if they have something really threatening, and you don't want to get hit by a crazy volley. You can hack it, shut them down, maybe get your volley off first if you time it right, and then hopefully be a little bit out of the danger zone. But either way, I primarily use the hacking for taking down big chunky shield layers that enemies have, especially the flagship. There's also, other stuff like hacking piloting or engines if they're trying to run can maybe buy you a couple seconds. It never really helps me that much, but if you need to, you can. And I find that if you're going heavy on drones, you kind of need to use a drone every jump or every battle at the very least. Hacking, you can kind of get away with just situationally when you need to use a drone part, you can launch one, You'll come up against ship A, you don't really need to hack, you're fine. Ship B, they have a ton of shields, attack it. Whereas drones, it's I need this drone to do more damage or to defend me, whatever. So I think hacking is the supreme usage of your drone parts throughout the run. Especially, you don't really need this so much early game, so if you get it late game, you'll have a ton of drone parts saved up, and this will just be, you'll be able to spam it. Medbay. Okay, so Medbay is definitely better than the Clone Bay, again, like I said. You need one of these, right? I still don't think the Medbay is it's kind of difficult to rank because, you need a med bay or a clone bay, right? But realistically, nobody cares about the med bay, right? It's required to heal up your crew. But do you care when it gets hacked? Do you care when it gets blown up? Do you care when they board in the med bay? No, not really. It doesn't do anything really minute to minute, second to second of combat and gameplay or surviving, other than very, very niche circumstances. it's really just like you need to heal your crew back up. Yeah, okay, great. Like, you have to have it, but it doesn't do anything to actually help you win. You could have your med bay down the entire game and probably win relatively easily. Obviously, I'm not like, that's a bit of speculation, but you get my point that the med bay doesn't actually do really anything. And I'm only putting it a little higher because I like it better than the clone bay in most every circumstance. Okay, mind control I think is going to go in generally useful. In base FTL, I've been playing a lot of multiverse, and it's definitely higher in that mod. But in base FTL, mind control is just, it's okay. It's like generally useful, right, as the tier says. But I think, again, there's no reason to prioritize mind control over either of these. Not that many ships in base vanilla FTL have mind control. So using the counter mind control strategy is useful, but not that common. And mind controlling, if you have boarding, can be useful again. So it's kind of situational. But I find just mind controlling a single crew and getting them to either unman their system or fight their homies on the other ship pales in comparison to removing all shield layers or removing all damage for X amount of seconds. Like, it just doesn't compare. And it can help you win. It's still good, right? But I think there's really not a lot of reason to prioritize it other than it's fun, or if you're doing a boarding heavy run, it can be a bit more useful. But even still, I think hacking and cloaking for a boarding run are still going to be better for you. If you're getting really unlucky and you haven't found any of these or something, it's not a bad thing to buy. It's still in, quote unquote C tier, but I really don't think it's the best system of all time by a long shot. It's fun to use for sure, and not to mention slugs are just immune to it. So if you're in a slug sector, it's kind of like, okay, guess I'll just not use it. So yeah. Okay, moving on to oxygen. This is going to be ruffle some feathers for obvious reasons. O2 is highly situational. Do you need oxygen to literally survive and win the game? Unless you are a complete Lanius ship, yes. Okay, you need oxygen to beat the game, technically. Realistically, oxygen is more not to win the game, it's more designed so you don't lose the game, right? If you don't have oxygen, you're going to lose. If you have oxygen, it doesn't mean you're going to win because it doesn't do anything for you. It's merely a defensive gameplay mechanic to balance your micromanaging around. There's no, like, on your ship at the very least, like, it does nothing. So depowering it for a couple seconds to power up a weapon or something in the heat of battle is super helpful. It can be off for a little bit of time, and you're going to be totally okay, right? You can even, like, you can build around it. A Lanius ship doesn't even need this, right? If you don't have any non-Lanius crew, you can run an oxygenless ship, right? So it's kind of like a difficult one to pick because you technically have to have it, but it doesn't do anything for you really. So the biggest takeaway from me putting this here is do not be afraid to depower your oxygen if you need an extra power bar. And similarly, don't upgrade your oxygen really ever. There's like maybe a couple random situations where you'd want to, in case you run into the event where they hack your oxygen. Having level 2 oxygen is super helpful, but that's like literally one event in the entire game. So oxygen is not that useful. Do not be afraid to depower it. Yeah, it's kind of like a funny situation here, but it's going to belong in the lowest tier just because you don't really need oxygen for anything. Okay, piloting or autopiloting, technically, it's a bit of a toss-up because actually piloting is, again, necessary. It ties in with engines, your dodge chance. You need a pilot, and you need your piloting to be online. So for that, it's very, very useful. However, the autopilot effect that you can get by upgrading this is less useful. Not useless, but less useful for sure. 90% of the time, you don't want your pilot to be not in piloting. And if he is, if you have it maxed out, you get 80% of your evasion, which is okay, but it's still like, it's only 80% of your max evasion, which is not, it's not ideal, right? So if getting one level of this to have that 50% evasion, 50% of your total, let me clarify, you don't get a free 50% evasion because that's actually hella good. You get 50% of what you had if your pilot was in there. So that's like okay just to have a little bit of dodge chance, but that's going to be pretty low. I mean, if, say you have 40% evasion normally, you're only going to have 20% with autopilot if you have level 1 upgrade. That's not that meaningful, right? Like, it doesn't really help you that much. So the autopilot upgrade is not really worth buying until you're at the very end of the flagship and there's a higher chance your pilot might be moving around. But 90% of the time, your pilot should never leave the pilot room. So I guess for the autopilot kind of bonus, it's a nice bonus, you know. If you have that later on in the game, it can be helpful. If you have a ton of micromanaging to do and you're in a tough fight and you got to move your pilot to fix or to fight, whatever, having a little bit of autopilot can be nice and can be helpful. Otherwise, I don't upgrade this as a subsystem. It's not really that helpful. But I mean, you need piloting again, so you guys have to take this list in context that, like, obviously piloting is an S tier system because without it, you don't have engines and you can't dodge, you can't fly, and you can't get to the flagship, etc. But strictly talking about autopilot and everything, it's not really that meaningful. Okay, sensors are also going to go in situational. There's a reason that a handful of ships literally do not start with sensors, and you pretty much don't need them the entire game. Sensors are undoubtedly the worst, not even worst, just the most irrelevant system in the game. You can beat the game without them and honestly not even notice most of the time. The only thing upgrading them helps with is seeing weapon charge-ups, right? Seeing the enemy crew inside the ship. Gives you a little bit more info on what they're fixing, what they're not, whether there's a fire, etc. But there's so many things that you can do to nullify the, like, not nullify, but to get around not having sensors. For example, you have a single slug crew, you can see whether there's fires, etc. Okay? Because the animation of the crew, they'll be putting them out. If there's a breach, you don't need sensors to see. You can hear the sound, right? You just got to pay attention. It'll, and you know there's a breach, so you don't have to worry about it. Seeing their weapons charge, obviously you can't literally do that, but you can just know as you've played the game, right? A burst laser Mark II charges in X amount of seconds. You'll see it glow, light up. You know it's going to fire. So yes, it is nice to have the sensors to see that and see what the enemy crew is doing, but you can get around it so easily. The one thing I will say is being able to see your own ship can be a little dicey. Sometimes you might have a fire or a breach of yourself and you just don't know. But if you don't know, then it probably wasn't that relevant. It's probably in like an airlock anyway. So sensors really aren't that helpful. If you don't start with them, it's not necessary to buy them at all. Like, I've played tons of runs into slug cruisers specifically that don't have sensors and never bought them because you really don't need them. They're very, very situational. They can help, but you don't need them. Okay, so shields, it's S tier. I mean, you can do a shieldless run, but I would not recommend unless you're doing like a challenge run. Shields are essential, man. Having early game level 2 shields, as I say in all my videos, it breaks the early game. You are immune to so many ships. All the mini beam, burst laser 1s just cannot hurt you. Things like that. And you can just grind. You can save so much damage and so much scrap by having shields. So upgrading these to max by the flagship is really the best way to assert a victory. Along with some engines, you have level 5 engines and you have level 4 shields, you're almost guaranteed to win. As long as you play smart, having just those two things gets you such a defensive bonus that you're really going to be okay. I mean, there's not a whole lot to be said about shields, right? They're a core game system. They're insanely powerful. And yeah, there's really nothing much to be said about that. Similarly, I mean, weapons, again, like, other than cloaking, these three are like mandatory for winning, right? Drones are not a supplement for weapons. They supplement weapons, but they are not a supplement for. You have to have weapons to win the game. You can't win with boarding, really. You can't win with drones, really. You need weapons to win. And they're weapons. You got to blow things up in FTL. So early game boarding is great, but you're going to need some weapons, and you're going to need to blow ships away for sure. So these four, if you have these four and have them upgraded sufficiently, you are going to be in a very good spot. So yeah, that's going to be the tier list. Quick things to take away. This order right here, these three, is what I would prioritize. Buy cloaking, right? Hacking is really nice as well. If you don't have any time left before the flagship, or you have a ton of money, you're playing on easy or something, or just you have a specific build, maybe go mind control. But really, these three in this order is my ideal. Teleport, don't buy necessarily unless you have a really good run for it or you start with it. Drones, use as a supplement. They can be helpful, especially with a defensive drone 1, but otherwise, you can't really rely on drones, unfortunately, in base FTL. So yeah, that's going to be my tier list. Let me know how much you guys disagreed, how much you did agree, what are your thoughts, everything like that. Follow me on Twitter if you like I don't really tweet that much, but I find memes on there sometimes. So yeah, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you in the next video. See ya.